we will start with something that I'm sure a lot of you will appreciate, and that is a question that every Harvard graduate has to respond to in an essay, in the final essay before they graduate. It is actually an excerpt from a poem called A Summer Day by Mary Oliver. The last line in that poem goes, "So tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" I hope that this is something that you will be able to answer at least partially after this workshop or webinar. It sounds very grand in the beginning, but you will receive some tools that will help you answer this without hesitation, hopefully. But take a moment to think about this question right now. One important item before we go on, this is the plan of the webinar and some of the outcomes that I hope you will be able to see. First, we will audit your time. You will audit your own time. Nobody else will do that for you. We will learn some time management tools. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with most of those tools, but hopefully there will be something new for everyone. We will identify priorities, and we will take on the bigger task of thinking about our mission in life, going back to this question from Harvard. And one of my favorite things to do is actually, getting to the goals and setting a 12 weeks plan, and I'll explain why it's only for 12 weeks. One important thing that I wanted to make sure, and the concept that you would have in your mind, is to always understand that these things, focus and motivation, as well as energy, are the resources, the things that need to constantly be re-inspired, reignited. I'm sure you have felt it yourself in the past. I'm sure you understand what it's about. So a lot of us lose focus, a lot of us lose motivation. Yeah, and energy levels are always different, right? And I want you to think in terms of short-term and long-term. So your long-term motivation and your short-term motivation, watching a motivating video might inspire you for a day or a week or 5 minutes. We're all very different, right? And then focus. The first part of this webinar would be around the issue of your attention, because the things you pay attention to are the ones that change, are the ones that actually produce results. And I'm sure you have noticed that yourself in your school life and in your life in general. And we're not going to get to energy in detail, but I also want you to think about it, and you will notice how all three of them are related. So first, we're in the focus area, right? Where is your focus right now? One of the first things people do is, and whenever you will have sort of coaching exercises and things like that, you will notice that they always start with this tool called the wheel of balance, of life balance. It's very difficult for us to dedicate time to a particular part of our lives, well, to all parts of our lives simultaneously. And usually we try to ensure there is a balance. And occasionally it's good to do this audit and see on your own scale. So you draw this sample here, right? And you try to assess it on a scale from 1 to 10. And this is how you visually identify. Sometimes it's easy to just think about it, but when you put it on paper, it's actually visually quite powerful to see which areas need your focus. Sometimes you know it intuitively, but sometimes you also have to see how you grade it yourself. So this is the first exercise in auditing where you need to, improve and set some goals in life. I'm sure for a lot of you, that part of that goal might be career and study, maybe service and community. But this is where it's very important to understand when we if you remember that note about important, the energy and focus are connected because if you focus only on one area of life and it's disbalanced, then, for example, you stop seeing your friends and you notice that it affects your spirits and your general attitude. You get depressed and tired and there's no one to talk to, or you distance yourself from your family and so on and so forth. So it's very important to ensure that you focus on all of your areas in life in a balanced fashion. And hopefully that will be also something that you will be able to do after this webinar. So let's audit your time. Just answer this question yourself. What has the power to distract you? 1 or 2 or 3 items, 3 max, on any given task, on any given day. What distracts you and your focus and your attention? Most of you name what they call weapons of mass distraction, and your phone contains them, right? I'm going to jump right away into some of the solutions. First of all, one important thing, what you could implement is for a couple of days, take a couple of days and, maybe more, depending if you want to assess, but maximum 1 week, and try to see where you spend your time. So, as Steve Jobs used to say, it's easier to connect the dots at the end. So, just no pressure. Don't put yourself into any time frames. Just start recording what and where you spent your time on a piece of paper, maybe on your phone. That offers too many distractions, but really in a disciplined way. See where and how your time disappears or is used productively, for example. Maybe for 2 hours you do homework, and then for 5 hours you spend on social media. Maybe another hour you spend talking to your friends, another hour chatting to them, another half an hour, 2 hours you are in group chats and just having fun. It's okay. That's no judgment. In order to improve, you should not judge yourself or feel bad about it. But what happens is what you measure, you can monitor, assess. It actually is a really powerful tool. It sounds very simple, but when you, again, see visually how much time you spend on social media, and of course there's electronic apps for tracking your time on social media, but in general, the time you spent eating, maybe it was 2 hours or 2.5 hours instead of the time that you thought you spend on it. And what can be measured can be changed because it's monitored, because it's assessed. So that is my recommendation for you. If you've noticed that those are your distractions, you can actually see what other distractions you had. And maybe you see that you'd rather spend more time reading or doing other things. And that visual will be your micro motivation for at least some time, but it will also help you understand yourself and your habits. And we're going to get into that a bit later. And also the habits tracker. To be honest, for a very long time, I thought that this is not something that will help me. Once I started doing it, so I just took a separate notebook specifically made for the habits tracking, but it's usually my daily things that I repeatedly do, and things I want to make sure I don't forget to do. And I thought, again, you don't really need that, because you would always remember to, it doesn't have to be brush your teeth, but something that's important. Maybe it's an exercise in the morning. Maybe it's a particular reading you need to do that is not urgent, but you need to progress on that. Maybe it's a test preparation. Maybe the test is 1 year away and you feel like you're not obliged by the deadlines to do it so fast. So it is things that you don't think about, you just naturally do. There's another tip here that I want to add. Psychologically, it's very easy if you prepare a particular space for your habits to happen. For example, if you are exercising and doing, I don't know, maybe you're working on a yoga mat for that, and just making sure that if you want to do it in the morning, that yoga mat stands somewhere beside the bed, or, somewhere where it's very comfortable and easy for you to just automatically do it, because habits are unconscious. And that's a good thing about it, because they free up your working memory and you don't have to think about them. You just automatically do them. And another example is if you need to read, and if you have a particular setting for reading, have a corner at your place where will be outside distractions, and you'll have the 3 books that you need to read, and the less the better. So to create the space for your habits to happen, if possible. The MIT researchers have discovered what is called the habit loop. When we go through our day, there's a particular routine we follow, right? And their example was about rats. That's why you have this picture here. So what would happen is at a particular moment when you have a cue, a memory of some sort, or you see a sign where it says coffee, and you immediately subconsciously, done without thinking, just go in, you get a habit of drinking coffee in the morning and passing by, not thinking about it. So you get the reward, you're happy, and it creates this loop. So it's a circle where you do something without thinking anymore. And the great thing about it is that, again, as I mentioned, your working memory is freed up, because our working memory is limited. Its capacity is limited, and also it doesn't really remember things for too long. So when you have this habit loop, you don't have to think about the many things that you do that do not require thinking. The reason for that is because then you free up your time to do long-term memory exercises, for example, preparing for the test and remembering things that require a little bit more of your memory. What is important to understand here is habits can be good and bad, and you're the only one who decides whether your habits are good or bad. So for example, social media, what is the cue when there is a notification, right? Once there is a notification, you automatically grab your phone, and there is a reward because you saw how many likes you had on Instagram. It becomes a loop. It becomes an endless loop. What you can do is, first of all, you can break the cycle, and if it's a bad habit and you don't want to do it, you switch off the notification. So you take away the cue. You take away something, a trigger, that happens, that distracts you, for example. This is then important to remember about the reward. Maybe you would say, if I don't get distracted for a long time from my phone, I get myself an ice cream, or I have 20 minutes on social media afterwards, and that's a big thing, for example. It depends. You can decide what you do, but the important thing is to change your routine so that you enter your brain a completely different sort of algorithm. If you were to program yourself for habits, so you prepare a different cue and a different reward. But these are important because these are biologically set up, that we cannot change it. We can only change how we do, what are the cues and what are the rewards. These are also used for bad habits like smoking, for example, and the good habits like, as I mentioned to you, giving yourself an ice cream, whatever it is that you want to do, but assign a particular reward. Maybe you studied for a test, and this can be done long-term and short-term. So you can do it just for the next couple of hours. You can also do it for a week. So at the end of the week, I will go out with my friends for the whole day, whatever it is that's considered a luxury for you at this time. If I will make sure that I follow the whole 6 days or 5 days exercise routine, or prepare for the test, and so on and so forth, that will be my reward. So you can use this and apply it to the good habits, and also break the cycle of the bad habits. So talking about distractions, I think most of you mentioned that it's the social media and your phone in general that contains all these apps and everything. We're still in the focus zone. So we are still trying to understand how our focus and attention works. But what you have to remember is you only have 24 hours, and 7 days a week, it's the same cycle. Besides breaking that habit loop for bad habits and creating new ones for good habits and everything, whatever tools you're going to use and whatever tools I am going to share, please remember that, you will create your own routine. You will use your own tools. Maybe you will discover more tools as described here in time management map mind here. It's very important that you listen to yourself and what works and produces results. So you track your own effective habits sort of practices and see what works and doesn't. And eventually you will be able to, you might be overwhelmed by some of the tools that are here, maybe underwhelmed, maybe that's not too much, and you can implement them. But the most important part is that you actually do something to practice them, and then see what works and what doesn't, eliminate what doesn't work for you, and then move on. So I'm going to share some quick tips on, making sure that you try to work through those habit loops and try not to distract yourself. The first rule of 20 seconds, very simple. If you notice, again, that's to break your the cue for your phone distraction, for example. So it's been scientifically proven that if it takes 20 seconds for you to distract yourself, if it takes more than 20 seconds, what happens is if you put your phone away into another room and you feel at some point like you want to check your phone, if it takes more than 20 seconds to get to your phone, that's enough time for you to potentially change your mind and not do it. If there is anything that distracts you, try this rule. For some people it works. That works for the majority. For some people it doesn't. So if it takes that effort of 20 seconds, then you're not going to do it. But that applies also to good habits as well. So make sure that your morning routine exercise is something that you can do within 20 seconds. You can start within 20 seconds. You don't have to, wear something, like to put on something for longer than 20 seconds. Make sure that it's just a quick 5-second exercise, and you start, and you're on your, yoga mat, or you go out running, just putting your running clothes and off you go. So another rule is 5 seconds rule. This rule applies to the times when you feeling a little bit overwhelmed, or maybe semi-depressed, or it's just hard for you to start something. This was actually a discovery by Mel Gibbs. I believe it's a woman. She was in depression for a family situation that she was going through, and financial situation, etc. And she couldn't get up out of her bed for a very long time, like 6 months or something. So it was probably almost near clinical depression, and nothing could get her out. So she'd motivate herself, she'd watch a video, she'd listen to her husband, and she would say, the next morning I'm going to get up and start getting my life back together. And nothing helped her. And then once she watched a rocket launch, and she noticed how before the rocket launches, they count backwards. So they go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and off the rocket goes. And she started researching into this, and she found out that there is something psychological about these 5 seconds being counted backwards. And if you do not postpone, do not delay, and keep lying in bed, for example, for longer than that, you can actually jump out and start doing whatever you need to start doing. You count backwards from 5 to 1 and just go for it, whatever it is that you were supposed to be doing. As they say, the hardest thing to do at yoga is to put yourself on the yoga mat, for example, right? Or to start running, to go out and put on your Snickers and start running around. So it's very important to remember that it's just kind of your brain. This is all psychological work, and try to see if it works for you for some of the tasks that you don't feel like doing, but you just go, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, just start. And once you start, you get into this flow, and we're going to talk about how to keep that flow going for a little bit longer. There is a book about time management called 15 Most Effective Time Management Tools. It's one of the most recent ones. There's a million resources on this, but I think this is a very helpful one because it's an updated and modern one. And its author, Cruz, has this sign on his office door, and it says 1,440 minutes. Whenever somebody enters his office and says, Chris, do you have a minute? He looks back at the sign and just assesses, because what is it? what is 1,440 minutes? It's how many minutes you have in a day. And every one of us have 24 hours. Every one of us has the same 7 days a week, 12 months in a year. Some of us are able to spend them productively. Some of us are able to win Olympic gold and go to Ivy League schools and compete in, different sports, or have hobbies that bring them somewhere far. Some of us still try to motivate ourselves to achieve those things, and some of us are somewhere in the middle, right? But what is important is to treat every minute as preciously as possible. And if somebody is trying to steal those minutes, and that includes your phone and social media and other things, just try to think in these terms. And maybe this will be a helpful tip for you and tool for you as well. So when we were talking about the 5 seconds rule, I mentioned that there's a way to keep that flow and focus. Back in the 70s, there was an Italian student who just couldn't get to work on his thesis. And, the paper wouldn't write itself. But he noticed that if he gives himself 25-minute intervals, and this is where his focus is highest. So anywhere you look for how to learn and how to focus, etc., you will notice they mention Pomodoro technique or Pomodoro method. It's one of the most simple tools to bring your focus deliberately into the things and tasks at hand. This is the scheme by Francesco Cirillo about what are the steps for that. So if you remember, I mentioned about tracking your time in the beginning, where you spend it. In the future, if you're able to do that when you do your to-do list, try to go forward and assess what time you need for a particular task, what time you need to complete something, for example, and see afterwards how long it actually took you. And this is going to be your good estimate. So in the future, if you need to write a paper and you think it's going to take 2 hours, maybe an essay draft, and then break it down into 25-minute intervals with a 5-minute break. And for those 25 minutes, you do not distract yourself. You make sure that all distractions are away. Your phone is in another room or switched off, and you just focus on the task at hand. And the progress you will have, and this has been tested many times, I'm using this all the time in my work, in my personal projects and social projects. It works amazingly. And as you know, there are sometimes things that we have to motivate ourselves to do as an extra element. And we're going to talk about motivation in the second half of this webinar. But what's important to remember is that we're talking about focus, and we're talking about focus on the things that we like doing, and then there are things that we have to do. I'm sure you all go through that stage, especially when I was a teenager. I can imagine I would rather do a lot of other things. What would you do after this? After those 2 hours, you would reward yourself, hopefully. And you would take a good break and think up of a reward, because that will prepare your brain also that when you do those deliberate focus sprints, you will later associate them with a reward. There are other apps available, and actually I really like the app called Be Focused on the top right here. But there are many tools, and I really liked this 9 important apps to keep you focused. You can check it out through this reference there. Try them out. Try and see which one works for you. And Be Focused is actually keeping you, this is a Pomodoro method, then Flat Tomato is also a Pomodoro method as well. So they're probably around the same things. What's good about them is you can list the tasks that you have. So your to-do list for today, for example, and then you can just let the app do its own calculation of when you need to take a break, and that will hopefully discipline you as well. One of the most important things, and I hope that whether you're watching this on the video later or you're here with us today, Eisenhower matrix. So those of you who know who Eisenhower is, that's a former president of the United States. So he asked his secretary to make sure that whenever there is a paper coming in for his attention, that she puts this, his secretary would put them in 4 trays. One tray would be important and urgent. Another tray would be important, not urgent. Third tray was not important, but urgent. And the fourth tray would be not urgent and not important. In his case, what he would do, he would only look at the papers in the first half, the upper half, the important papers. You don't have to do that, but he would throw away the third and the fourth one. That proved actually to be one of the most efficient methods. And this was studied by Stephen Covey, who later wrote a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Where does your time go? This is very important to understand. And if ever you get a chance to get a Franklin Covey training and your future employer says that they're able to provide that training for you, always jump in and say yes, because that's the most fundamental training you will ever get on time management and effectiveness, to be honest. I learned it from this training, the Bermuda Triangle of wasted time. And this is to understand where our time goes effectively when we try to assess it from, a helicopter view from afar. What are some of your tasks that could be in quadruple 1? Where it says crying baby, kitchen fire, and some calls. Something with a deadline, something that you have to do for work or something that you have to do for your studies is important and urgent. Important because you get graded for that, urgent because there's a deadline. And these are the things you always have to attend to because they are important and there is somebody waiting for them. What are some of the things that are important but not urgent? This is the yellow square here, quadruple. Exercise, vacation, planning, vocation. So it's very important to notice the difference. It's not vacation, although vacations are important as well. I'm not going to go into the not important but urgent, and not urgent, not important. You can see perfect examples here. The distractions and interruptions and other calls, or a friend of you asks to do something would be urgent but not important, and they say, oh, sure, whenever you have time, but it's urgent for them, for example. And then number 4 would be time wasters, like the actual, you can be distracted, but then what you waste your time on is maybe the social media. So it's quadruple 4. How does normally, and this has been assessed, your time flows. So for example, this is like a photograph of what's happening in your life right now, where you spend the time. But how does it flow eventually day to day? I'm going to show you that famous Bermuda Triangle. If you know what Bermuda Triangle is, this is where ships disappear, right, in the Atlantic Ocean between 2 continents. And so let's begin. So usually we focus on quadruple 1, on what is important and what is urgent. We feel so overwhelmed, there is that notification on the phone and we get distracted and we turn to the phone, we start playing with it. Maybe we just, get busy with that and don't notice how time flies. These are not urgent, not important things, just, watching memes or laughing at them and just kind of wasting time. We feel that's properly wasting time. There's a big difference between resting, spending time with friends in a quality manner, or wasting it when you feel like, instead of a couple of minutes or 15 minutes to chat to a friend, I spent 5 hours on Instagram and another 2 hours chatting. This is the type of things that would go into not urgent and not important, and this is where you wasted your time. So you feel terrible about it, and then a friend of you calls you and says they have something urgent they want to discuss with you. So it's urgent for them, and you just go with the flow. You kind of chat, and then you spend another hour or 2 there. And then you go, oh my God, I have a deadline. I have to study. I have a deadline at work. And you go back to the square 1 again. And that's what they call the Bermuda Triangle of wasted time. If you notice, you didn't even touch anything from quadruple 2. Don't worry if you notice that this is you. This is the majority of people in the world. We all go through these stages in any case, no matter how productive we are in general. This is our typical psychology. Why we're on this Eisenhower matrix, and why is it important for you to always keep this map in mind? This is one of the most basic things that you would be taught in time management classes or courses. If not, then just remember it, because it's very important for you to assess yourself. What is important when you set the goals in your life, and that's what you do intuitively, is focusing on the things that are important but not urgent and implementing them so that you always put them in priority. Another note here is this urgent column, the upper first column. These are the things that are important for someone else, and that is why there's a deadline. That is why, for example, the school needs to get you the grades by a particular time so that you would get your diploma, and that is why there's a deadline. But it's important to understand that that urgency is not your urgency. It hasn't been created by you. It's urgent because it's important for someone else. And where they meet is where it's important for you. And that's why you will always keep doing what's in quadruple one, in square one. But it's your duty and obligation to also focus equal amount of time on the quadruple two. And what's not important, eliminate it completely. So there's another way to look at this, and this is the actions part of the Eisenhower matrix. If you notice, this is the familiar squares. Let's look at the left side first. So urgent, important, you do them because it's important for you as well. It's important for someone else because it's urgent, but it's also important for you. Then you plan. That's where you goal set and you plan things that are in quadrant 2, not urgent, but important, because they're important for you. And you're the only one who puts a deadline there. And what is not important, but urgent? So if it's urgent, then it's important for someone else. Then there must be a way to find somebody else who's able to complete that task. Or so delegating is a very important skill to learn through leadership and through other exercises. You have to keep learning how to delegate, but not in a manner that let somebody else do my work, but in a manner where you find ways that something is done even through technology. It doesn't have to be delegated to a particular person. But for example, if shopping needs to get done and you don't have time for it, it's urgent because you will be without food, but maybe somebody else could help you get those groceries. Not urgent and not important. There is this fantastic word in English called eliminate, which is you just have to get it out of your system. There is this German, whoever speaks German, there's a version in German on the right side. I just like the visuals there. You see those exclamation mark on things you will have to do that are urgent and important. There is a deadline that you set yourself where it says February 20th. So you put your own deadlines, put them in the planning, put them in your goal setting exercises. You delegate, and then there's a beautiful waste bin for the things that you should eliminate to the maximum level possible. What we've also discovered here is priorities. And later on, when we go into how to plan things, I want you to remember that priorities, if you forget what your priorities are, just sit down and draft an Eisenhower matrix for whatever period of life you have. Maybe it's for a week, maybe for a month, maybe for a year, and put out things that you want to do and things that are, important for you and urgent. It's always important to put things into context, because what happens to us, if you saw the Bermuda Triangle, is that we keep doing things that are not managed by us, are not initiated by us. They're managed by us, but we just we're in someone else's life. Quadruple 2 is your life. And this is when you look back at your life, this is where you will understand that, these were the things I loved doing. And if you notice, there is a check mark in a smiley there. These are the things that will make you happy, and things that maybe learning a language, maybe learning a guitar, relaxing, and all of those things that you put off, especially at the young age. You have to learn how to control your energy, relax, and sit down to plan your life. This is why quadrant 2 also includes planning, because you need a quiet time like today, like right now, to dedicate to your own planning and trying to establish where you're going to go next and the big things that you need to do. Urgent things will take care of themselves because you're going to have to do them anyway. There will be somebody else pushing you. But for the quadrant 2, you have to push yourself. And that is how things you write down there, we're going to break them down later on and make sure that you keep this map in mind when you do your daily to-do list and you put 3 things out of this quadrant 2, out of this priorities quadrant, and make sure you do them daily, weekly, monthly, and so on. And this is the way to identify them. So now we're going to do a little visualization exercise. There are two exercises here, actually. So write down the first things that come to your mind, just quick kind of brushes. If you were a painter, just a few quick things. The first one is, imagine yourself in 7 years' time. Just a quick background to that. Biologically and psychologically, we change every 7 years. So it has been proven that our cells are completely replaced and renewed every 7 years cycle. It means that it's an over-exaggeration, but every 7 years there's a new version of you. That is why we're going to take this mentally into the 7 years cycle. Please write down quick things about where you are in 7 years' time, who surrounds you. So who are the people that surround you? What are you doing? What do you do for a living? What do you do for fun? Okay, hopefully you were able to jot down some quick thoughts about where you see yourself, and I highly recommend to do it from time to time. Now, another task, also very, very quickly, just to make sure you were still in that prioritizing mindset. If you had just 1 year left to live, what would you do? Quick list. It can be 3 things, 5 things, 10 things. And the reason we have, actually, you'll see Steve Jobs maybe a couple of times more. Most of you might know the background that he had brain cancer. Luckily, doctors were able to sort of extend his life for 11 years instead of a shorter time frame. But in his famous Stanford speech, he mentioned, and he referred to it a lot, that it helped him, that knowing that there is a terminate time frame. We don't think about it when we're young. Hopefully that's not going to be the case for us in the future either, that we have to time ourselves this way. But it's a very sobering thought and a very sobering thinking mindset when you realize that our time on earth in generally is limited. And we're going to go into that a bit later with Steve Jobs reference again. But this is a very helpful exercise when you feel lost about what you should do and you feel lost about general priorities in life. This is the second question, is more value seeking, when you understand what is the most valuable thing in your life, actually. Because I don't know if you're able to compare, and usually during life trainings, I ask people to give me an example of the one thing they had for 7 years that is not there if they realize they only have 1 year to live. It includes things, there's usually comments that it's a lot more relaxed when you're 7 years time and you're dreamy about it, and some people imagine themselves on the Maldives and, a house on the beach. I don't know, whatever it is. Some people imagine themselves, studying in an Ivy League institution and being surrounded by friends from all over the world. Whatever it is, it becomes slightly different. The perspective changes when it's only 1 year. And these are two, sort of interrelated but separate things. So for the second one, people would usually say, I'll spend more time with my family. I will, do something that it's important for other people, etc., etc. So just for some of us, it's different. For some of us, maybe you'll say, I'm going to travel around the world. Maybe it will be a little bit more about contributing to this world and spending more time with people you love. So this is more of a value exercise, and I hope you enjoyed it. Next, we're quickly going to jump into the goal setting bit. I specifically made sure I didn't go into the SMART goal setting. I'm sure you know about SMART goals. I can kind of go into that in more detail, but make sure you Google, if you don't know what it is, how to set goals using SMART system. So as being specific, measurable, achievable, timed goals. So that's the abbreviation, and relevant to you and to your life circumstances right now. So that's the abbreviation for it. I'm mentioning this because it's an important strategy. You always have to make sure that whatever goals you set are achievable and measured in time. We're not going to spend too much time on the SMART goals. I'm sure you already are doing that, or know, or will research the background. The novelty here, maybe some of you didn't hear this. A lot of us set goals in the beginning of the year, and you probably heard about New Year resolutions and so on and so forth. But what we realize is that sometime in October, we figure out that we haven't learned to play the guitar. We haven't learned French. We haven't set those things. We haven't done those things that we set our goals to do. We haven't started reading, 25 books a year. What is important to do is, they call this breaking down the elephant. If there's an elephant in the room, how do you start, managing that amount and scale of things to do, breaking them down. And if in terms of time concept, it's breaking them down in 12 weeks, which is roughly about 3 months. Thinking in 12 weeks perspective helps you achieve goals. Actually, people who wrote the book, and that's Brian Moran and Michael Lennington, the authors of the book, they claim that you can achieve in 12 weeks what you could have achieved in a year. That's quite ambitious, and depending on your goals, maybe some of them are still kind of time related and should be done in longer time, or they're too big in terms of workload. But I guarantee you that if you will start these 12-week sprints, you will see a lot more progress in your life in terms of your goals. So the advantages of this system is it helps you stay focused. It helps you, as I mentioned, to break down the big goals into smaller goals. It's easier to measure, and as if you remember, whatever's measured can be changed, and then there's more motivation. And the way it works is there's a motivation loop. So there's if you achieve something within a short time frame, it motivates you to do more. Have you ever had that feeling after running or exercising or doing something that you haven't done for a long time, or you've been postponing, and you feel that success, you feel that adrenaline of, wow, I've achieved it, and all your happy hormones are playing around and dancing around and you feel like you can do more because you pat yourself on the back and say, yay, I've done it, I want to carry on. So if you break it in smaller chunks, you're able to get more motivation. And if you remember in the beginning, I mentioned to you that motivation is something that it's replaceable, it goes away. So it needs to constantly be there, and small progress actually is a lot more effective. And of course, tracking and amending your course. What is important, this last bit about amending. Sometimes you put a goal and you say, okay, I can read 100 books a year. And then within 12 weeks, which makes it about 30 books, you realize you can only read, 2-4 books a month because of your workload and because of other things. So what you're able to do is have an honest conversation with yourself, and you're able to say, well, okay, it's an unrealistic goal for me right now. I'm going to read only 2 books a month, and I'll try to read 6 books in 12 weeks. So, and so that's how you start operating in this more agile system. And that's something for those of you who know what agile is, setting goals for a shorter time frame and amending them. So a couple of notes when you set your goals. First of all, if you remember the Eisenhower matrix, we now know how to figure out what are our priorities, right? And not to break them into things that are important for someone else. Because a lot of times we put in the priority things that are not important for us. So 12 weeks, the things you're going to put in there, only the things that are important for you and not urgent. And this is how you put the time frame there. Before you start your 12-week sprint, write down an ideal week. Just how you had the 7 years of vision recently, visualization is very important. It has been proven that it's important for us psychologically to already be in the picture and see it. So how would you see your ideal week, and make it as unrealistic as possible. It's okay, because your ideal week is just to make sure you keep in mind things you might have forgotten. It is also to make sure you put in the habits tracker some of those things, to put them off your mind, because it's been also proven that whatever you write down on paper frees up your mind as well. You don't have to keep those things in your mind, right? So there are some things that you can just get off on paper. There is also a separate note I want to make. It's not here, but writing down with your pen and on an actual piece of paper. Those of you who are using your computer all the time to do these things, there was a study actually among Harvard MBA graduates. One group was asked to write down physically their goals. I think it was like a 7-10 years time goals setting exercise. And then the other part was, they didn't write it down. I think they were given an option. And then they checked back. And 10 years later, those who actually, so even though the others also verbally mentioned what their goals are, the ones that wrote them down, more than 80% actually achieved their goals. And less than 20%, the Pareto rule, was not able to achieve their goals of the ones that didn't write them down. So it's very important. There is some cognitive reaction that is happening when you write things down. So when you're writing these big dreams, 7 years visualizations, your 12 weeks plans, try to jot them down on, in a small notebook. It's also important to separate it from your to-do list. This is not your to-do list. This is your actual planning, like a diary. So usually I always have 3 notebooks. And it's very tricky because I'm going to show you another tool later called Bullet Journal, which can combine all 3 of these things. But it's essential that, sometimes when you just start planning as children, you probably remember how either it's in your diary or you have a to-do list, buy groceries, call grandma, other things. And as we learn our life become more complex. I don't know if you've been through that, but I've definitely been through that, where on a single notebook, I have everything, and it's written in a very, there's a structure, but things are chaotic. And this is where you mix your to-do list, you mix your habits tracker, you mix your, that's the book I need to read. And it becomes this idea booklet, etc. It's wonderful to have it, but it's one important thing to make sure they're separated, because your mind needs a structure. Once you categorize things, that's it. Your mind agrees with it, and that's where you will actually do these things. So again, this is where you write down your ideal week, and that would include things like wake up at 6 a.m. and, or 5:30 and watch the sunrise, do yoga or run, or do some, for boys, whatever it would be, the exercise in the morning, the sort of strengthening exercises and so on and so forth. Making sure, for example, in your ideal week that you spend at least one day with your grandparents, or something that you're missing on, and something you've written down in your 1 year exercise, for example. So things that are still important for you. So your ideal week could be just like, filled completely with little things, have lunch with my friend, spend Friday playing board games with my friends, and so on and so forth. And then every day in the evening after school, prepare for my SATs, etc., or TOEFL, and so on and so forth. Of course, it would be a robot who would be actually physically be able to do that ideal week. And you take that ideal week and then you copy the actual week and start planning things that, okay, this week I'm able to do this and this and this out of my ideal week. Not only you're doing the priorities setting, but you also know what on a weekly basis. It gives you like a canvas, it gives you a platform to just copy and put back, the modules of things that you need to do within a week. Track your achievements weekly. And from this book, actually, they recommend in a year, there's a little bit more days. So it's not exactly, the year is not broken down in equal parts of 12 weeks, but they recommend 13th week to dedicate to doing nothing but evaluating the 12 weeks period and seeing what you've achieved, how far you've come, what worked and what didn't, and then planning the next 12 weeks. So taking 1 week break, like in Pomodoro exercise, 25 minutes, 5-minute break. It's very important, and it's been proven, among even the leaders of companies and countries, and that they need a buffer time. And actually your week needs a buffer time. So 2 things to remember: put your 3 priorities on a daily and weekly basis, and put in a buffer time to think about it within a week and within 12 weeks as well. For us, usually it's that New Year's resolutions time once in December for a lot of us, right? And that's it. That's when a lot of people plan their lives and what they want to achieve, you're going to be a lot more focused this way. And so these 3 priorities must answer the question, what would make my day or week meaningful, or would make me feel like I'm progressing in my life and in my quadrant 2, the things that are important for me. And another important thing is about gratitude, whether you practice it daily or weekly or every 12 weeks. I once had a very important training. It was done for another reason. And our trainer said, let's take a 5-minute break because I want to give you a tool to happiness. And I want to give you a definition of happiness. And I want to give this opportunity to you as well, to do what he did to us. What would you describe happiness in 1 word? The reason I mention happiness is because we're not able to achieve our goals if we're depressed, if we're upset, if we're sad. We're not in the zone. Our energy levels are low. Our motivation is low. And one of the things that are important on a daily basis is to be coming from a place of happiness to achieve our goals. He tortured us for 5 minutes, and then he said there is 1 word that defines happiness, and that is gratitude. Because if you take health or harmony or being loved, it's being grateful for the fact that you have them that makes you happy. I think great achievers are people who are internally grateful and happy for what they have, and that's how he also defined, people who are unhappy they take for granted, or they don't appreciate things they have. They always want more. It's okay to be ambitious. It's okay to plan and everything, but be internally happy and that make sure that is not something that, of course we have mood swings, especially in the teenage age and adolescence, but it's important to, again, as we did the deliberate focus, we also deliberately think about things we're grateful for. And that's when the brain, there is something biochemical that happens in the brain that, gets into this happy zone. And this is where you get your motivation back to planning and so on and so forth. So it's also important to keep the vision in mind about what is it after 12 weeks, after a year, what you would be having and achieving in life. We're going to talk about the vision a bit more in detail soon. One exercise I promised to mention to you, the bullet journal. So if you don't want to carry around 3 notebooks like I have, one for habits tracking, another one for daily to-do lists and scheduling, and another one for my general goals and activities. We don't have the time in the time frame of this workshop, this webinar, but I encourage you to Google bullet journal, especially YouTube, how to bullet journal. There's a lot of resources out there. Essentially, it's keeping things in one place and being the creator of your own bullet journal. Typically, they have, if you saw these notebooks with these dots, if you're good at drawing, great. But the key is not about beautifully drawing it, because you probably waste even more time. If you're able to do it, great. But the key is to program it the way that works for you, because all of these planners and journals really work for someone else, but they don't necessarily work completely for you. I used to always take just like a notebook with just a checkered notebook and do what the bullet journal folks were doing. This is especially important if you have several projects that you're working on, and probably if you're planning to apply to US, you have a lot to focus on. Maybe it's preparing for language exams. Then separately, there's SAT exams. Maybe there's essay writing, and so these are separate projects. It gets too crowded when you have to put them on the in the 12 weeks planning and everything. What is recommended is to have, so you go through the bigger chunks to smaller chunks and to even smaller daily tasks. You just separate your notebook. Again, that's typically me. For example, you separate the notebook by 3/4 or something like that. So in three parts. The first part will be dedicated to larger scale planning, like 12 weeks. This is my 12 weeks here. This is another 12 weeks here, and so on and so forth. So I go back to that. Then after that, the second part of my notebook would be about projects. And this is where I reference certain things here. And then I go, this is separately for my exam planning, for TOEFL, for example, or IELTS, whatever you're doing. Practice the writing, and this is more project-based. Then you have the second project on the same, in the next page, but in the same part of that, the second part of the notebook. And you say SAT prep, the math tests. And then you go into that to-do list that you have to do for this specific project. And the next one, you have your current, project. Maybe you're involved in some tech project, or you're programming something. And then the third part of your notebook would be your daily things that mixes everything from here. For example, I need to do my guitar lesson. I need to do this for my SAT. I need to do this for my math test. So hopefully that was helpful to you. Sorry, it's actually a completely separate kind of training in how it's done in detail, but I'm sure you'll be able to, you have now a general idea. And this is how, like, this notebook, for example, then becomes the most precious thing that you just carry around. And writing them down, as I mentioned, helps you actually achieving them. That Harvard experiment proved it. But also, you don't have to put these on the different pieces of paper, and you can break them down into as many things as possible. As you, this is just my example. Maybe you have a fourth part where you write down ideas. Maybe you have a fifth part where you write down, if books are important to you, you write down book recommendations. Yeah, whatever it is. So you keep adding parts of that journal, but they become separate parts, and you create how they look. And you can write down daily gratitude, like it's on this picture, for example, and maybe some of your to-do list for your family, and so on and so forth. So things like that. It's a very, very useful tool. Sometimes they call it BUJO, so it's bullet journal. Don't be surprised by that abbreviation. So BUJO, like the first two letters of the two words. It's a very, very popular concept in time management and goal setting these days, and planning out things. One of my favorite quotes by Carl Jung is just to remind you that, whatever you set yourself to do, it's very important to understand that if you haven't done something, it's because it wasn't important to you. It wasn't your priority. Because we are what we do. We are reflected to the outside world, and we identify ourselves, besides our common, things that we identify as humans and everything, but we also identify ourselves by what we do. So it's very important to remember, you are what you do, not what you say you will do. So I hope that's going to work as a good motivation for you. As a side, this is just a supplement, but we already went into this cue and habit loop. What was a big discovery for me personally was this 4 personality tendency when it comes to habits. One of my favorite authors on planning and habits, and her first book was on happiness, called Happiness Project. It's Gretchen Rubin. She discovered that people, when it comes to habits, have 2 personality types, and the way they're separated is by inner and outer expectations. So some of us, if we know that, for example, we're going to get Instagram likes, we're going to post that photo. So the outer expectation, I'm just kidding. Those usually include more in-depth things. For example, if you know that your friend is expecting to run with you in the mornings, you will be more inclined to do those things. Some of us, our internal motivations do not work. We need that external accountability. And so you can do a quiz on her website here, quiz.gretchenrubin.com, and find out which 4 tendencies is your tendency. So she discovered that there are 4 types of people, and that psychologists knew that all along. She was researching it, and she found out that psychologists already knew this. She was just able to frame it in her own fantastic way. Some of us are upholders. And in simple terms, I'll explain what this means. So as you see, it's Gretchen has written down that these are the people that meet outer and inner expectations equally. For example, it's somebody who says, I need to learn French. And that person in 1 year or 2 years will speak French, because on a daily basis, that person just learns French and, puts those things in quadrant 2 into their to-do list, and they just do it. Whenever they have, basically, I call these expectations as promises. If I promise it to somebody else, I will do it. If I promise it to myself, Maybe I will do it slowly, gradually, I'll procrastinate, etc. So these are the people that are called obligers, meets outer expectations but resists inner expectations. So upholders promise to themselves, promise to the others, and they do it. Obligers promise to others, promise to themselves, they don't do it. But if they promise to someone else, they do it. Why is it important in terms of habits? And I'm going to go to the other two as well. If you recognize yourself right now, don't worry about it. It's important because I think it's a breakthrough in habits elements. A lot of us notice that, no matter how hard I work on not focusing on distractions, or no matter how hard I want to learn French, I'm not able to do it. This is because we just have different personality types when it comes to habits. And when I know that, for example, I'm an obliger, if I promise to Dana that I will be doing this workshop, I will do it. So outer accountability is important for me. If I want to learn French, I know that if I promise it to myself, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. But I would need to sign up for a class. I would need exams. I would need outer accountability. I would need to promise to someone else that I'm going to do exercises. And so you're only one category, unfortunately or fortunately. But what is important is, as she says, she's quite an optimist, and she says everybody wants to be an upholder. Everybody wants to promise they're going to run in the mornings and do it. She's an upholder herself. She promised herself that she will write a book, and she wrote it. And in this case, how you want to be a superhero and you're not, and you feel like, wow, upholders are superheroes. It's not about that at all. All four categories are superheroes. We just are able now to address our habits and practices and adjust our lives. Questioners, usually they resist outer expectations, and they easily meet their inner expectations, because questioners usually need a lot of answers to their values. And if outer promise to someone, let's say somebody says you have to do this task, if it doesn't answer their internal values, they will not do it. For example, they will just have to have a lot of questions answered. And rebels, they resist outer expectations and they resist inner expectations. A lot of you are in the adolescence age, and you probably will say, oh, I'm probably a rebel. But take the quiz and you will understand that you're a completely surprising maybe category. Upholders represent about 1% of the population, and rebels as well. So both categories are very, very rare. Obligers are 80% and questioners are 18%. So exactly half, more than half of the world are obligers. More than half of the world needs an accountability partner, and they need to tell somebody else that they're going to do something, and promise and incentivize through that. But what that knowledge helps is actually the relationships with others. Gretchen Rubin, in her book, she actually says, once I figured out that my husband is a questioner and I was an upholder, it was easier for me to say, my dear, you need to get the trash out tonight. In the past, we would quarrel about it because he would say, but why? And he would ask me so many questions. Now I would start with, darling, we're having guests tomorrow, and if this trash will be here, it's going to stink. And also, the kids have to go to school tomorrow in the morning. We won't have time to throw it in the morning. Would you be able to throw the trash away, please? And her husband would be like frozen, and he would have his questions answered and just quietly go and do it, because it met his values and answered all the questions. This knowledge not only improves your habits, but also helps you in your relationships. Maybe you recognized your family members here, and you now know how to deal with this. And these are quick tips from her book called The 4 Tendencies on how you need to work through these things. I have a lot more details. This is, again, also usually a separate kind of training in its own right. But one of the things I want to recommend, if a majority of you are obligers, like they usually are, provide face-to-face interaction and praise. So if you have obligers in your family, or if you have in your circle, or if you are an obliger yourself, make sure that you have a reward system and that you reward yourself. And also make sure that you have an accountability partner, some kind of goal-setting group. That's what I did. almost 5 years ago now. Not almost, actually. It was in November 2015 when I read this book, and I found out about it. She has a specific recommendation in her book on what each category must do to get better at their habits. For rebels, if you have a rebel, make sure that they always have a choice. You should never tell them what to do, but instead say, you can study and get, a good job, or you can do nothing and then sweep the floors, which is great. I will love you either way, but that's your choice. And the moment the rebel hears that magic word choice, that's when they spring to action, and then they decide what's best for them. Questioners need to make sure that their values are aligned with what's being asked of them. And this is how a lot of us say, why do I need to study for the exams? Why do I need to study in America? Maybe some of you still have those questions. Maybe it's your parents who insist on that, but you can answer your own questions and make sure it fits your values and see the benefits of, I think studying in the US is the best thing you can do for your life and your future, of course, separate element there. But it's very important to understand what motivates you and how your habits system works. I've already mentioned this training and book, and at the end I will give you some recommendations for the books, but this is one of the most important books you'll have to read. And you don't have to read, again, either get a training or read this book, but this book takes a lot of processing. Actually, the first time I had a friend who read it 2 times and she didn't understand it. And then after I talked to her, after my training, she read it again and she said, this is amazing. There were so many pearls there, jewels and gems that I didn't realize, because all of the self-help books and trainings are based on this book. This is a training that is given at the US government, at Google and Facebook leadership. So it's mostly higher level people that receive this training, and it's available through this book. Also, not going to go into the details today. We covered item number 3, put things first, and that's the Eisenhower matrix, how to understand what's important. Sharpen the saw it's a different category. It's about relaxing and making sure you spend time thinking and planning and exercising and doing things that bring just good health to you and energy, controls your energy. Begin with an end in mind is something I'm going to go to now, because this is about mission in life, and this is about long-term motivation. If you remember, I was talking about short-term motivation in the beginning, and now we're going to focus on long-term motivation and how to keep that. These are some of the other things about synergy and about relationships. This is to make sure that all of your wheel of life balances. But there is actually quick articles describing each of these habits. If you're not able to read the book, I highly recommend spending some time to going through that. This is actually from the book. I just wanted to show you, we covered habit number 3, put first things first out there. And this is the sort of the part where the lower bit is dependence, where these are the things that depend on you. This is how you improve yourself. You're proactive. You begin with the end in mind. That's something we're going to start covering now. And as they say, private victory. So you work on yourself, and then that's habit number 4, think win-win, is where you interact with other people. And that public victory element is where you start developing this influence and you're able to work with other people. You're able to listen to other people. That's habit number 5. Then you're able to synergize, create teams and work in teams, and then work with other people. And that's interdependence, and it improves your relationships. So there's a depth to that philosophy, and I highly recommend to read it in detail. But today we're focused only on making sure you are ready to be independent and succeed in your private victories and in your goals achievement. This gentleman that I've already mentioned, Steve Jobs, he's an excellent example because of the strategy he had for his company. In 2007, he has created a revolution with his smartphone. That is when he presented the iPhone. A lot of you might not remember, or maybe you were, born or starting to go to school or kindergarten at the time. But that's the time where the world as we know it would never be the same, where we could access our email and work through our phones, and talk to our friends through one, and see our friends through one gadget. His success story is studied in business schools and so on and so forth, and we don't have a chance to go into the detail, but his main mission for his company was, so sometimes companies and organizations have different missions and goals. And he said that his main question for his employees was, why? Why are we doing what we're doing? And it's such a simple concept, but that's what revolutionized Apple computers. And that's what that's what brought them to the stage that he was at in 2007. Start with a why. It's very applicable to your personal mission, and it's very important for you to understand. I guess you guys are quite young, and so it's hard to think about what Stephen Covey used to call start with an end goal in mind. But you have to understand eventually why you're doing what you're doing. And at the end of your life, what are the things that will help you feel proud of yourself? What are the kind of achievements, depending on your values, because everybody has different values. We have common human values, maybe cultural values, but then individually you have your own values. You know what's important to you. And starting to ask this question, why, and what is my mission in life? Not the meaning of life, because that's more, maybe scientific question, but why you would do what you're doing. Because that is the key to your long-term motivation, and I will show you how a little bit later. One helpful book for this is a book called The Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So when you talk about, again, as I mentioned, question of meaning in life is difficult, but his question was why you're doing what you're doing. He went through a Nazi camp in the World War II. So he went through. He was somebody they were doing experiments on his body and so on and so forth, and he survived the Auschwitz camp. And he was a psychoanalyst, and he created an area in psychoanalysis called logopedia that deals with depression. So he actually helped a lot of people fight depression afterwards, and his method was based on this experience in the concentration camp, in Nazi concentration camp, because he noticed there were two categories of people: the ones who knew why they want to live even after losing everything they had, but they could answer why they still have to survive. And the other part that, those who didn't see the meaning in their lives quickly, disappeared. They lost their health and could give in very quickly. It's about how not to give up. And I think it's very important to build resilience from early age, especially at such a tender age that you have right now, your adolescence. There might be mood swings. You might be motivated at some point, but then, when you lose that motivation, think about the hardships a lot of people went through. And I think this book is doubly important for his search for meaning, but also for how he was able to show resilience and help some people with that resilience as well. He actually was in the secret psychoanalyst network, and in these camps, they secretly exchanged methods of how to help the camp. He doesn't write it in the book, but it's part of his biography that I read later, that he was actually helping the people in the camp. So I think it comes from this kind of bigger range, radical part of people who are depressed, and how he helps them find meaning. But it's easier to be healthy and to, as a prescriptive measure, just in case, to understand how that works, but also to in your search for mission in life and meaning in life. I think this is an important book, among others. There's actually a lot of others, but I think it's a powerful book to help you with your research on meaning and mission. But I'm going to help you with some practical tools as well. Mr. Dilts is actually, he's a I believe, a British scientist, and he developed it's a neurology exercise. This is something that is used for human resource motivation in organizations, and it's called the logical levels, human logical levels. It's a very quick thing, and I'm glad that it's going to be part of your sort of presentation that you can later look at. But one important thing I wanted to mention, you probably are familiar with Maslow pyramid of values, and this is slightly different because this is helping you figure out what's your mission in life. And if we start with our environment, behaviors, capabilities, values, and beliefs, and try to assess and answer these questions, we eventually climb up to find out this mission of life question and what's your purpose in life? Why is it important, your mission in life? When you think of that question, remember the rule of the pyramid. The top of the pyramid always influences and affects the bottom, but not the other way around. So when you figure it out, your identity, when you figured out your purpose in life, you're able to adjust all the other things, your behaviors, your environment, you're able to change those things. So those transformations that happen in people, they happen on the upper level. They understand why they're doing what they're doing and what they can do with their life, what's their goal in life. And I recommend for you to sit down later to answer some of these questions. But on the level where it says identity, I just want to mention that there's a tool called Identity Map, I believe. Yeah, if you Google that, it's just a circle and has like a sun. You can just write down your, who you believe you are and who other people believe you are. So, I'm Kazakh, I'm a girl, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, etc., etc. So, I'm an economist and I'm this and that. So it's a very simple exercise, but the others might be a bit difficult, especially the values and beliefs. But all of them will help you eventually with that final part. And this is where you will understand, you write down your values and you understand why you're doing what you're doing, why you surround yourself with the kind of people that you surround yourself with. And you identify whether there is a need for change. Because if you change the upper level, if you change your thinking, you're able to change all the other things by the rules of a pyramid. Sounds, again, this is a separate training and sounds a bit too simple or too complicated, depending on how you look at it. But hopefully you'll find this useful. And there's one more visualization exercise. I know there's a few of you remaining and we should be wrapping up. So I'm just gonna ask you to do it later on when you have a chance. But that's your mission and life building exercise, actually. And that comes again from the Franklin Covey training. You have to try to imagine that it's your 75th or your 80th year anniversary, and you imagine people coming into your table one by one. And these are your future colleagues, these are your friends from your childhood, these are your parents, and touch the wood, and we're going to live up to 200 with the new technology and biomedicine and everything. So you're going to see everyone you want to see. It's important to think in abstract. It's not about physically imagining it, but imagining what they stand there and tell you as a toast. And it's important for them, imaginative people there, to say, I am grateful to you for, and imagine what they thank you for. This is an exercise that we did as part of that Franklin Covey training that helped us discover, at least for me, a lot of my missions in life. And also the people that you will see coming through, these are your potential projects that you want to accomplish. For example, if you want to be a teacher in the future, you imagine your students coming to you and saying, thank you for inspiring me. If you want to be a good son or daughter, you would have your parents come in and say, thank you for making me proud, and proud to be your parent, and so on and so forth. And again, if you read the book, you will understand that it's not only your personal goals, but we as humans are related to our roles in the society, who we are, and that identity gap exercise that I mentioned to you. And this is where you will be able to understand in which role, what kind of achievements you want to have through this exercise. This is actually a very powerful exercise. And I know during my past trainings, we had people who would break down into tears. They would have issues imagining their parents being old and things like that. So I can imagine it might have some traumatizing effects, but try to do it at least for the other roles in your life. This is a quick one, but it will help you with that goal setting part. So these are some of the book recommendations, and I put a star next to the ones that I highly recommend. If you haven't read The Defining Decade by Meg Jay, I highly recommend it because that's your age. You're the ones that need to read it. It's about the fact that from your 20s to the 30s, that age decade, that age bracket is actually the most defining part of your life. It will define the trajectory for the next. It will define 75 to 80% of the rest of your life. And I think reading it ahead of time is very, very, very important. She's a psychologist that works with people who are in their 20s. Very applicable to everyone in our part of the world. See You at the Top by Zig Ziglar. I think, if I had anyone younger than myself to recommend this book to, but also, anybody, very, very important book and very well written as well. His examples are extraordinary. And again, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Then some of the other books I mentioned during this webinar. That is actually the end, and I'm turning it back over to Dana. And before that, I wanted to remind you about this question. It has now a white background here because this is your canvas now, and you would be writing the rest of it. So try to answer this question, and hopefully you have the tools to answer the question, and be able to tell me what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. And that's something you have to tell yourself, not me, of course. So thank you very much for being here, and I'm wishing you to achieve your goals, to create something new and amazing. Do something with your life. So that's going to be that you're going to be happy about.